Welcome back, everybody, however you are and whenever you are. This is an anonymous audio cast by someone on the road to recovery while exploring spiritual paths and the mystery of life. I'm lucky, very lucky, to have on for a second time, and hopefully only the first time you hear it, Sensei Robert Chodo Campbell. And I say that because we've had some serious struggles with our audio issues, but finally we've got them worked out and we can finally hear Sensei Robert Chodo Campbell's beautiful voice. But before we get into that, let me tell you a little bit about him. Sensei Robert Chodo Campbell is co-founder of the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. The organization delivers contemplative approaches to care through education, direct service, and meditation practice. In order to bring the work to a broader audience, he co-developed the Foundations in Contemplative Care training program. Chotto is part of the core faculty for the Buddhist track in the Master in Pastoral Care and Counseling at NYZCCC's education partner, New York Theological Seminary. He teaches in the University of Arizona Medical School's Center for Integrative Medicine's Integrative Medicine Fellowship. Chotto is a dynamic, earthy, and visionary leader and teacher. Chotto has traveled extensively in the U.S., teaching in various institutions, as well as bearing witness to the suffering of HIV/AIDS in Zimbabwe and South Africa. His public programs have introduced thousands to the practices of mindful and compassionate care of the living and dying. 30,000 people listen to his podcast each year. His passion lies in bereavement counseling and advocating for change in the way our healthcare institutions work with the dying. He is a senior Soto Zen priest and Soto Zen teacher. Welcome back, Chotto.
Welcome. Here I am. Can you hear me this time?
I can hear you, yes.
Louding.
This is actually our second recording. We had done a complete interview before, and some issues that were a bit mysterious caused a great deal of humming and feedback, and we've worked all those problems out together, I might add, and eaten up a lot of his time, and so I thank you again for sticking with this. So what do you prefer to go by? Chotto? Is that like for anybody to call you Chotto? Or?
Sure, Chotto is great.
Okay. All right. And so the reason Chotto asked him to come on to the program is because aside from being Buddhist and working in the world of contemplation, he also is an addict, alcoholic, and he has his own personal story. So Chotto, if you could please take us back to the beginning of how that started for you.
My pre-recovery, or
what the root? Where do you think it began? Your addiction? Yeah.
I think my addictions began way back in childhood, needing to anesthetize myself from the crazy environment that I was raised in, with a single mother who was also an alcoholic and was attracted to violent alcoholic men. So my first drink, I think, was around 9 or 10, and I actually, in hindsight, since our first interview, realized that when I drank whatever was in the house, even if it was just a little bit of scotch here and a vodka there, that it took the edge off the craziness, and I could go out into the yard or walk around the street and be kind of numb to it all.
Mm-hmm.
My addictions really took full swing when I left home at 16 and started working in nightclubs, and was introduced to amphetamines at the time. And once my first round of amphetamines, for the first time in my life, actually felt alive. I was using alcohol to numb the senses, I think, and then amphetamines just got me so energized, and a lot of dancing, a lot of all-night parties, a lot of really awful come-downs from the drugs afterwards, but didn't stop me. And the whole time I was drinking. So
Yeah.
I had many opportunities to either numb out or get really high.
And did you feel like you needed to do this to fit in with people? Were you suppressing anything, or is it just that this is the only way that you felt that you could live and handle life?
This was really, I'm sure it was all that was in this, all those ingredients were there. But for me, it was, at the time, I was this, as I said, this 16-year-old kid working in clubs and bars and hanging out with much older guys, 18, 19, 20, who were already using lots of amphetamines and booze. So it was really to fit in, I think, in the beginning. But I quickly realized that for me it was a way not to have to deal with my life on any concrete terms. It was simply, it was the beginning of my geographics. I traveled really extensively from the time I was 17 till my mid-20s. Mm-hmm. I did a series of geographics both in England and abroad, living in Spain as a DJ, using something in Spain called Bustados, which was kind of like an amphetamine.
Bustados. I mean, wherever what does that come from?
Bustados. I have no idea, but I clearly remember the name, and I remember that we at that time. I mean, I was working in a nightclub as a DJ, not making very much money. Mm. This was in the 70s, and one could sell one's blood in just out of town. So we a group of us, would sell our blood every couple of weeks and get enough money to get tostados and bread. So it was kind of the whole thing was crazy. I mean, I hitchhiked I left Spain, and then I hitchhiked from London to Athens, and from Athens to Turkey, and then from Turkey to Amsterdam. Yeah. I lived in Amsterdam for a year growing pot. It was this crazy teens and 20-somethings. And then I ended up in Israel for a year.
Yeah. Chotto, just be careful. I think the mic may be rubbing up against your shirt or something like that. Yeah.
It's probably my beard.
That's your beard. Yes.
Yeah. I'll hold it away.
The beard of wisdom.
Maybe.
Maybe we're finding out now. Okay, so so this as you're going along this journey, like all you really care about is just partying and drugs and drinking and having a good time, right? There's no, you're traveling around the world. Most of the time when people are doing that, they're looking for something, they're seeking something. Was that a part of it?
I don't think so. I think I was looking for the next good time. Yeah. Maybe for a moment in Israel, being in such a beautiful country, and living in Jerusalem for a while, there was an idea that maybe I could even settle in Israel because there was something so magical about it. But I soon got bored with that. The problem with me was that I would just get bored, and I would think, well, where's the next place I could go to? So there wasn't a feeling of groundedness anywhere.
Right.
It was just up and go. Then when I ended up in London, back in England, I really got into the cocaine scene. This was then in the 80s, so late 70s, 80s. So it was a lot of partying, a lot of discotheques back in those days, and a lot of cocaine and an awful lot of alcohol.
Yeah. So how long did you use for before you even thought that you might have a problem? Did you have a pre-thought, like maybe I have a problem, or was it just one day, bam, I've got a problem?
It's funny. It's funny and it's kind of sad, but my whole family of origin are alcoholics. So I remember telling my mother that I think I'm an alcoholic, and she said, "So what? We're all alcoholics."
That's not what you expect to hear. Wow. Okay.
That's not a loving parent for you. And I think, at some point in London, because I was, there were lots of hangovers, lots of come downs. I started to realize that maybe this wasn't so great for me. And yet, even really feeling like shit some days and, dancing all night and then having to go to work the next day feeling awful. There was an intention, should we say, to quit, but it never really got fulfilled. I never really sort of said, "Oh, yeah, okay," because the next day, by the evening time, a hangover would worn off, and there'd be an opportunity to go out and booze again. So
yeah, I think that's the tricky thing about it. It's like, you hurt, but then because you're able to kind of come back from it, it's like, oh, well, I feel okay again now, so why not go back out and do it again? Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember when I started throwing up, that every time I threw up, I would say, never again, never again. This is it. I quit. And then I remember when coming down from amphetamine saying, oh, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. This is the last time. And then the next time the opportunity presented itself, it was like, oh, it wasn't so bad.
Well, that's the tricky thing, right? Why does the mind do that? Why does it convince you, or how? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, logically that when you've experienced something over and over again, it doesn't work. The consequences are usually bad. How is it the mind tricks you into thinking you can do it again?
Well, I think for me anyway, I had to really hit bottom to begin to. I think once the seed was planted for me, which was much later, it wasn't until I was in my 30s, and I had pushed the envelope so many times, and seeing that my life really was unmanageable. Before I didn't really see my life as unmanageable. I just sort of, well, this is crazy. I'm having a great time, so whatever. But once then when I had moved to New York in 1983. And for me, New York was like a candy store. There was so much happening in the way of drugs, sex, rock and roll, that I took to it like a kid in a candy store. But it was then that I really started to realize that my life was unmanageable. I had a great job in London. I came to New York to open an office there, and I saw how things were starting to slip. How my reality was really not, let's say, other people's realities. And I started to, as I said, there was a seed that started to plant itself. Maybe this is not what should be happening here. Yeah. I would still throw up. I would still have hangovers. I began pushing this envelope of, there came a point where there wasn't enough drugs, there wasn't enough cocaine, there wasn't enough parties, and so I started pushing the envelope to, and ending up in very dangerous situations, looking for dealers on the Lower East Side, and yeah, it wasn't great, and I was picking up strange people in strange places, and those coyote mornings when you wake up the next morning, you think, who is this? And what's your name? And no, I'm not making breakfast. Goodbye. And then I think what happened then, Alan, was finally, I think for the first time in my life, shame started to set in. I started feeling really not good about myself. I started feeling, shameful, ashamed of what I was doing. And I don't know where that came from, but it suddenly started to creep in, and I got into psychotherapy and started to unravel all this stuff, what I was doing. And it really was about a journey of self-destruction. It really was about, once I started looking at that shame stuff, I saw what was going on here.
Well, have you ever read the book Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw?
Yes.
Yeah, I read that book, man. That was one of the had one of the biggest impacts in my recovery healing process early on. because I really didn't get it. I really didn't understand it. I felt guilty, and
Right.
I did feel shameful, but I didn't understand why I felt so bad. And as I was reading through this book, I realized it felt like everything was connected to shame. And so even if you're not using for a while or drinking for a while, that shame is still there, and it's that same
Right.
shame that can get you sober is the same shame that can get you back out again, because you're living with that weight.
In my therapy, after about a year of being in therapy, my therapist at that time gave me an ultimatum. She said, if you don't get sober, we can't continue this work, because actually you're not remembering the sessions, and I know that when you come into the office, you've already had a martini or two. So we're wasting each other's time. And she said that I think the journey that you're on, you're going to either kill yourself or you're going to get killed. And I don't want any part of that. So here's the number of a friend of mine who is in AA. Call her this evening.
Yeah.
Get yourself to a meeting, and if that doesn't happen, we're going to have to come to closure. And that really scared me.
Well, how long were you in therapy before she said this?
It was a year, almost a year. And
So she must have known for a long time.
she did. And there was a piece of her that I know there was a piece of her because we discussed this. I mean, I was in therapy for almost 15 years, and we discussed this afterwards. And she said, you were so fragile, and you had this facade of being this big, strong guy, and the stories of your childhood just were so awful for me. I couldn't be the next one to abandon you, but I could no longer be part of that, part of your story. So, it was about a year.
She said abandoned. I mean, so what was the sense of abandonment that she was talking about?
Well, I had a mother that would disappear for weeks on end. And remember, she was 17 when I was born, so the 17-year-old kid with her own problems. I can remember very clearly when I'm 4 or 5 years of age of mom going off to work and then coming home 6 weeks later, maybe. We were living with my aunt at the time, and it just became this norm almost that mom wouldn't, every time mom left the house, maybe she wouldn't come back. So I really began to, what's the word I'm looking for? That really began to be the norm for me. And then, of course, as an adult, seeing the craziness of that, the effect that had on me as a child, that no one in your life is going to be permanent. Everyone will, this was my take on it, that everyone will abandon me in the end. And so there was this, for me, I built up this persona of not needing anyone, because everybody will disappear.
So in a way, do you think that by her saying to you, I don't want to be the one to abandon you, but it's because of your addiction, then did you have a moment where you realized maybe, your adult abandonment issues have to do a lot more with your use than when you were a child? I mean, when you're a child, it made sense because somebody was actually, abandoning you for a time. But you were carrying that with you into your adulthood. Did you see the immediate connection?
Well, it became very clear when we looked at the relationships that I was having, when I looked at the way that I treated, or rather, certainly looking the way I was in relationships where, nothing's going to last forever, and I'll disappear or you'll disappear. And so there was always this, again, this bravado of like, who cares? Fuck it. If you call me, you call me. If we see each other, we see each other. If not, it's fine. And then in my isolation, it was really, really awful. It was I would go to very dark places and feel suicidal, that I was really alone in the world. So as an adult, yeah, those feelings came back that actually I am alone in the world. There is no one to take care of me. And I started to really realize that I needed to take care of myself in a very, very different way that had nothing to do with getting high and anesthetizing myself.
Well, the getting high and the using, or even smoking cigarettes, I mean, those become your friends that don't abandon you, right?
Right.
But I think that's when we hit our bottom, when it's kind of like, oh, you're not really there for me like I want you to be anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Was that kind of the experience you had?
Well, once my blackouts began towards the last few months of my drinking, there was the throwing up. I was like, okay, I can deal with the throwing up. I can deal with the nosebleeds. I can deal with the come downs. But after I started blacking out, and waking up again, and waking up in bars, people had just left me alone because I'd kind of blacked out. And the final blackout was waking up literally in the gutter. And
yeah.
And I'd come from a very fancy party in uptown Manhattan, and had been drinking and lots of cocaine, and I remember very clearly being loaded into a limo and being inappropriate with the limo driver, and he was so disgusted with me, he literally ejected me from the car. And that's the last I remembered about that until about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was laying there, and this very clear voice said to me, the gig's up. And I felt at that moment, even in my Armani tux and all the rest of it, that the only difference between me and the guy on the Bowery was this Armani suit. And I said, I have to stop this. This is insane. And so I crawled into therapy that day, and that's when she gave me the ultimatum.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it was awful.
And all along, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All along, did you have any sense of meaning or purpose outside of just getting up and working and partying?
No, that was my meaning. That was my reason for living, was the next party, the next line of coke, the next drink, the next drunk. I really believed that I really believed that I was having a great time, that I was, in with this crowd that was fabulous and had a great job. And I thought that I had reached the ultimate in my lifestyle. It was great. I wasn't hanging out in seedy bars unless I chose to, and I wasn't without funds. I had lots of resources. I had a boss that was enabling me, and there was no end to finances, and there was no end to opportunities to get high.
Right. Well, it sounds to me like you're something along the lines of being an atheist. Is that a correct assumption? Or more like a nihilist?
Nihilist. I would say atheist. There was no room for God in my life as I started to, in those days, in my drinking, in my active days. I would it was like this pity pot that I was living in. I had this story about, I had this terrible childhood and this violent childhood and lots of abuse and lots of drinking, and and if there was a God, he would never have let this happen to a child. And that was the story that was in my head. And that clearly ran through my whole, even though I never really gave it much thought in my adulthood or in my drinking days, that was clearly what was happening for me. And when I got sober, there was a realization that I was actually, spiritually bereft. I needed something this higher power to something outside of me that was going to allow me to see life differently, or enable me to see life differently.
Yeah, and I was just curious about that because I know there are plenty of atheists that do well in recovery programs and with addiction, but they do have their own spirituality. The word doesn't necessarily mean you have to believe in a supernatural higher being, right? I mean, it's more of like a state of mind. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think state of mind. I think that my mind was in a state.
It wasn't a state. Yeah.
It was in a state. I had this idea about crystals. My apartment had some nice pieces in it, but it didn't really mean much. They were just acquisitions. Just nice antique things or something. Had no idea what I was. And a
lot of people could be into crystal work and energy work and have a higher power they believe in and still be active in addiction. I'm sorry, you're going to say something?
I remember at one time I had this whole collection of Catholic iconography. There was something, very, and I didn't connect it at the time, but there was something for me that was, I guess, verging on importance of the Virgin Mary and the Virgin of Guadalupe. All these kind of these women, whether it was Mary Magdalene, but I collected all these photos and statues of these Catholic ladies. And so there was something.
So there was. I'm sorry, there was something there.
There was something there about possibly I'm going to be my own therapist here. The connection between the Good Mother and safety or redemption, possibly. Yeah. So there was something in the back of my mind somewhere that was searching for something.
So when you finally got into the program, how did you feel?
For my very first meeting, I knew that I was home. And that's such a cliche for 12-steppers. You hear that a lot, but it was certainly true for me. I was not in a meeting room that I would have thought I connected to. It was a meeting up on Park Avenue. We call it affectionately the Church of the Heavenly Dressed. I walked into the room. And thought, what the hell am I doing here? These ladies in their coats, their fancy coats, and, very waspy. And I was like, no, this is not me. And then the first person that qualified, I think it was a kind of anniversary meeting maybe. The first person that qualified us, I thought to myself, yep, I know I'm in the right place. And that was my first meeting, and that was almost now 29 years ago, and there was no doubt in my mind that I couldn't drink again. Interestingly, though, I hung on to the cocaine for another 6 months because I didn't realize I didn't think I had a problem with cocaine, because that was just a party drug.
Oh,
the cocaine didn't didn't cause blackouts. Right. I was fully aware of what I was doing and what I had the next morning and what I had done.
Well, in fact, you could argue cocaine would prevent a blackout.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So my last drink was in October, and then I continued with the cocaine until January. So that's October, November, December, 3 months. Mm-hmm. And I was living with a roommate from England, and she was also on this road to recovery. And I remember she worked in this restaurant across from where we were living, and she would come home and I'd say, you know what, you're an alcoholic, and she would say, no, I'm not, you're an alcoholic. So we both started going to meetings, and then it was January 31st, we were going to a party. It was actually a sober party, and I was in the bathroom doing lines of coke, and she caught me and she's like, what are you doing? And I said, well, I don't have a problem with cocaine. And she said, all right, you have to go back today. You have to go back to day one. I'm like, no fucking way. I'm not counting my days again.
Yeah.
She said, if you don't count your days, if you don't put your hand up in the meeting tonight, I'm going to out you. So I had to start counting days again. But it was that's where my mind was. It was like, well, I don't have a problem with cocaine, so I can continue to do that.
Yeah, but so what is the danger then of using another drug other than the one you think is the problem? For me, I would say, what is the danger of using another drug other than the one that is what you consider to be your problem? I mean, for some people, they say, well, pot wasn't a big deal. I know for me, pot wasn't a big deal. But I know if I start using pot, the action, this psycho behavior of trying to numb out feelings, trying to change and alter my state of mind, and actually, getting some sort of slight high, it's really flirting with the devils for me. Yeah.
For me, I think what kicked in was the people, places, and things where I needed to go to cop my cocaine was in bars and restaurants that where dealers would just deliver the stuff for you, and I knew that was not the best place for me to be. Very early, once I started counting my days again, I really took to heart the people, places, and things, and I had to cut a lot of people out of my life, and I didn't go into a bar for months and months and months until I felt safe enough. And then at some point I started working in a bar, and then I think I must have been about 10 years sober. From the very beginning, I knew that I could not drink again, and I knew that I could not toy with cocaine. And someone actually had said to me, well, if you start pot, that'll take the edge off and you won't become addicted. And it was a in parenthesis, sober person who was still smoking pot. And I said, no, I can't do it. I can't take the risk. I'm 10 years sober, and my life is I'm on the track that I'm supposed to be on.
Yeah, that's the marijuana maintenance program, as it's been called. I hear so many stories where people try it, and in the end, it doesn't really work for them.
Right.
So,
I can't take that risk.
Yeah, no. That's a thing that I think you have to go through a lot of pain to realize, because you try different things, you want to do it a little bit differently. And then you find out little by little that it doesn't work, and then finally you just say, I can't risk this anymore. Too much is at stake.
Right.
So what became, or how did you evolve into finding your own personal higher power?
So I should probably just say at this point that even though I finally found for me the Buddhist path to kept me sober in a way that, how do I put this? The 12-step program saved my life. There's no question about it. AA definitely saved my life. My first 5 years in program kept me on the straight and narrow. It just wasn't for me. And I emphasize for me. It was not the spiritual path that was working. I just needed more. I needed something other than listening to other people's stories. I needed something more than just don't pick up a drink today and, checking in with my sponsor. And I was 5 years sober when I met a Buddhist monk. She was a teacher out in Long Island, where I was living at the time. In my sobriety, I had achieved, I had a really stable relationship with another sober man. We had bought a house out in Long Island, and my career was back on track. I had all the trappings that I had dreamed about, a house, an apartment in the city, a lover, dogs, cats, swimming pool. And I was really, really fucking miserable.
But
There was a
sober.
time, but sober and miserable. And no amount of meetings was filling the space inside me that felt huge. And again, I started really feeling suicidal. And at one point, I thought, you know what? If this is sobriety, I'm going to go back out because at least I'll have fun.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I met this Buddhist monk. She looked like a regular little lady. And I started talking to her and got into this conversation about how I was 5 years sober and I had no spiritual direction, and I was an addict and a victim of abuse and alcoholism and drug addiction, and just kind of vomiting my story. I have no idea why I thought I had permission to do this, but I just kind of vomited my story all over her. And she said, "You know what you need to do?" And I said, "What?" She said, "You need to shut up." And I kind of was shocked, stultified by this comment. And she said, "Really, I'm serious. You are living this life out of these old stories and ideas about who you are, rather than who you could become. And you may try meditating." And I had never really taken meditation seriously, except just some meetings for 10 minutes here and there. And she invited me to her Zen center, and that was, 25 years ago, and she's still my teacher today. She was I think, the good mother that I was searching for. And my first encounter with Buddhism, I guess that was my second, because she was the first. But my first time sitting in a Zen center on a cushion felt just like the first time I went to an AA meeting. It was, I'm home. I just have to sit on this cushion and notice how crazy my mind was, how insane. Really, sometimes I was sitting on that cushion for half an hour here and 5 minutes walking and then half an hour again, and sitting all day sometimes on that cushion, seeing how my story was controlling my life. The story that I would never find real happiness, the story that all this was just like bells and whistles, the story that, again, I'm just this poor abandoned child. And I had to really, really look at that and really go inward. And from that day on, my Buddhist practice took first place, and the rooms of AA kind of took second place.
But you still attend meetings, right?
Yeah, funnily enough, in the last 2 years, for whatever reason, I had two people approach me to be their sponsor, and I never occurred to me that I would be in a position or in the mindset to be anyone's sponsor. And it's been a great experience, actually. Over the years, of course, I went to meetings, and whenever I went to a foreign city working, I would always check in to find out where the meeting was. I had this, for many years, I had this idea that if you're in a foreign place, it doesn't count. You can cheat. Those kind of thoughts would come into my mind. And especially going back to England, where, it's the social norm to be drinking, from 6 o'clock in the evening and go drinking in the afternoon. Whenever I would go back to England, the old triggers would just immediately kick in. And I love the smell of beer. I love the smell of English pubs. I love the whole social environment. So, I lost my track there, but anyway, it was about people, places, and things. So yes, I would still check in with AA meetings and go with friends. But as I said, in the last couple of years, I now have 2 sponsees, and it's kind of great, actually. The one sponsee I worked with, if that's the right word, or accompanied, or for a year, and she kept slipping and sliding and saying she'll never, I'll never get this. And I just was very, very patient with her. And now she is just over a year clean and sober, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
And the other sponsee actually has about 9 years. He slipped a couple of times, but he's doing great too.
Oh, that's
so
great.
I kind of love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously it's very early sobriety for me, but I think I can't imagine being someone's sponsor. But I know everybody kind of comes to it in their own time. Some people, it's a little over a year, and they're, they've gone through the steps and they feel like they're ready to help someone. Some people, it's 2 years. Some people, it's 10 years later, that they're ready. Yeah. So I think that is something to be a little leery of, because you do hear that a lot. People saying, okay, well, you have to sponsor eventually, as if they're kind of pushing it a little bit. And I think that can be dangerous. I think just like being ready to face the fact that you have an addiction, you also have to be ready to be a sponsor as well.
With my history of relationships, I really needed to get my life in order. I've now been in a relationship with a wonderful guy for 15 years, and I really needed to work on me before I could honestly and authentically work with someone else on their sobriety, because it took me many years to repair my own psyche and my own stinking thinking.
Yeah.
I was just I was one of those very slow learners. It wasn't just a matter of not drinking and drugging anymore. It was a matter of really repairing the damage I had done to my psyche.
Yeah, well, that's what's why I want to do this program, because what's so important is the life you live once you've come to accept that you have a problem, and you can go through the 12 steps of the program, but I feel like there's the broader aspect of that encircles it or enshrines it is your spirituality. And I mean, that's obvious in the program, but I just think that there are so many things to learn. It takes so much time, and we can learn from each other, from different paths of spirituality, whether it be Buddhism or being an atheist or Christian or whatever it is. People have their own tenets that they can bring from each of those and incorporate it, and it is a journey, and I think that I've come to accept that it's a journey that'll never end. I wanted to get to that place where I'm like, okay, that's it, I beat it. I'll just go to a meeting here and there, and that's it for life. And it doesn't work like that. But the benefit of that is I'm pushing myself constantly to be a better person, whether I was using or not, whether I was an addict or not. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So is there anything in Buddhism that you found alone in Buddhism and not in the program that you're able to incorporate into your life that could help you with your recovery?
I think one of the most important things I heard in my Buddhist practice was that I'm perfect and complete just as I am. And, even in my days of screwing up, which I do constantly on some level or another, in the Buddhist precepts, we talk about doing no harm, right speech, not elevating oneself above others, not misusing sex, not stealing, not lying. In some way or another, I break these precepts constantly, even if it's only in my mind. And there was that period in my life where these kind of thoughts or these ideas would be it would fill me with shame. Now I see this as part of my journey, part of my process. It's, I can be taking someone's inventory in my mind on the subway, looking at somebody on the subway and having all sorts of negative ideas. And then that moment of awareness arises, and I'm like, yeah, there I go again. Judging, valuing, putting someone down, and I don't even know them. And For me, it's not about running to some place in shame. It's about, for me now, it's, this is where I need to work. I was raised in a city where racism was rife, where violence was rife, where, and when I get these thoughts from this old life, I call it, the life before sobriety, it's like, oh, here's an opportunity to work on something new. Or here's an opportunity to work on this again and again and again. So there's this clarity that I never had in my active days of, yes, Chotto, you still have this bullshit. You still have these old demons. And no, they don't have to take you to a place of shame and wanting to pick up a drink to cover that.
Yeah, I think you can do that. You can say to yourself, okay, I don't need to feel ashamed. I don't need to feel bad. These thoughts are going to come through my head. I think that works only as long as you're, constantly working at being the better person. Because you could easily say that and use it as an excuse. And then little by little, those thoughts get bigger and bigger.
Right. Well, the thing is, if you're not taking it seriously, which is why my meditation practice is so important, which is why I have to sit every single day, which is why I have to go on retreat in silence. Unless you're taking it seriously, you're still bullshitting yourself.
Yeah.
The work has to be done. And it has to be done from a place of, as I said earlier, I am perfect and complete. And these are all my flaws. These are my unskillful behaviors. I don't like to think of them as character defects. I like to think of them as unskillful behavior. So it's been a long journey for me of forgiveness for myself, and even working towards forgiveness for my mother. How do I come to terms with that?
Yeah.
And that's been a long process, and I still haven't done that. That's something else I have to work with.
Well, in AA, that first step, accepting that you are powerless, and then after that, you have to deal with, okay, so what's going to help me, relieve me of my self-obsession, and so in your practice of Buddhism and meditation, is there something that you feel is bigger, like a universal life force, or what do you conceive as a higher power?
I think the higher power is within all of us. In my Buddhist practice, we don't see the statues of the Buddha as some deity that we have to bow to. We see the Buddha in each of us when we're bowing. So when I bow at the altar every morning to this, actually I have a statue of Kuan Yin, or Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, who hears the cries of all the suffering people in the world. She was very important to me, again, in hindsight, and I'm just realizing this. Again, there's the good mother, this statue in our Zen center of this wonderful woman on the altar. For me to fully embody the compassion that she embodies. So when I'm bowing to that statue, just my slight bow as I'm lighting incense, I'm embodying the compassion in myself to hear the cries of those who are suffering and the cries of my own suffering. It's so important for me to find the humility in myself that I screw up, and I'm doing the best that I can. Every day I'm doing the best that I can. It's not about thinking, oh, well, here's another thought, I'll just work on it. It's really taking that on.
Well, so do you feel like there's a super consciousness, or it's all on you?
I think it's all, In Buddhism, we say there is no separation between myself and every other sentient being. There's no different. We're all part of this huge organism, this Indra's net. Is that super consciousness? I think that's being awake in the world. That's what we talk about waking up. I'm awake, and I constantly strive to stay awake in the world. And in order to do that, I need to understand my relationship to everyone that comes into my being, into my life. So I don't see some higher power up there in the universe directing the whole show. We're doing that, and we're making it, on some levels, a real fucking mess. And then on other levels, we're really seeing, I think, in this day and age right now, and especially in these times where we are this month, the last couple of months, we're seeing a lot of scary stuff in politics. We're seeing fundamentalism. We're seeing, people pointing fingers. They're wrong. I'm right. It's
red-faced aggression.
Red-faced aggression. It's so unnerving. It's so awful.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
No. I think if everyone got sober and started thinking about their actions, we'd be living in a very different world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because when you commit down that road, it's maintenance of yourself, maintenance of your mind. You have to. It's about survival. So we're forced to do it. And you're right. If everybody committed to that, I think if everybody committed to something like Buddhism, clearly the world would be a different place. And Buddhism, there's the first tenet, or what the all life is suffering, or the Four Noble Truths, right?
The first noble truth is often translated as all life is suffering. The translation I like is, in life there is suffering. So the reality of this life is, there's suffering. Whether it's, I'm suffering because I don't have a Mercedes. I'm suffering because I don't have a great job. I'm suffering whatever it is. There is suffering in this world. And the second noble truth is that we create our suffering by grasping, by clinging to ideas that it should be different. That this life that I have is not the life I want. And it's about coming to the realization that I create my own suffering. My life on a daily basis is pretty good. And some days it sucks. Some days, my staff drive me crazy. We're not raising enough funds for the center. Certain people drive me crazy. And, the Time Warner cable doesn't arrive when they say they're going to be, and I'm sitting there all day, and I begin to suffer.
Even after all their advertisements, it's still happening.
It's like, what the hell am I doing? And I create my own suffering. Time Warner cable, I'm going to cancel them. I'm going to go to Verizon. And then I get on this wheel, and I have to suddenly stop, take a breath. What's really happening here? This suffering is really nothing compared to what some people are going through in the world.
Well, I wonder if that suffering is that related to that sort of darker side that we all have in ourselves.
My darker side absolutely comes. I think all that each of us that have that dark side. The dark side comes from a place of not being content with what we have. Whether it's, for me, whether it's incompassionate thoughts about others. Again, this is coming out of my suffering. This is coming out of my own judgmental, my own ideas, we all have, all right, I'll speak for myself. I have a little bit of Donald Trump in me. I have a little bit of Hillary Clinton in me. I have a little bit of the best and the worst in me, of we all have these facets that can take us to to the shadow side.
Mm-hmm.
And I really have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
I have to be on my guard. And as I said earlier, I'm breaking the precepts on a daily basis. And I have to cop to that. I have to do a lot of apologizing. I have to make amends,
Yeah.
often. I apologize for that behavior, apologize for that speech. It's in those moments that I'm not sober.
Well, I also wonder, what about that sort of metaphysical experience of a darkness? When you're outside, the clouds are heavy, the moon is out, and you have this sort of darker feeling, but it feels good in a way. What is that?
That's a big question. My darkness is about depression, which I've suffered with, for many, many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
When the world doesn't seem right to me, when I'm in my suffering and I'm not living the life I had hoped for, and on some level, here I am at 63 years of age, and no 401k, no pension plan, no life insurance, because I kind of screwed everything up. In those moments, when I go to my darkest depression, my practice of really knowing that everything is impermanent, helps me. I know that this dark period will pass. I know that I will come through this. That's what I tell myself. Now, of course, we don't know anything for sure, but my practice over the years has proven to me that I will get through this.
Yeah.
So walking out into the streets, and there's dark clouds, and it's too much noise, and too much this and that. It's like, this is part of life.
Right, but what about that literal, I'm talking that literal sense of, going out into the woods at night and it's dark, but it's not evil, but it still feels kind of dark. That it still taps into the dark side of your mind. That experience, that sort of mystical experience, is that a bad thing when you feel that sort of dark presence?
Not for me.
No.
That's being with everything as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Walking out into the woods and it's dark and scary a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's in my mind. I can make it really, really scary, and I can think of Jason coming out of the lake with his axe or whatever. Or I can think of, wow, look at the beauty of this dark forest. Listen to the sounds of those leaves, and I'm not impervious to being scared, but I don't see that as a darkness. I see that as an experience.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Chotto, for coming on the program again. And we finally got the audio worked out. I'm really happy that you came on. So if people want to find out more about you, they can go to zencare.org, correct?
They can. They don't have to find out about me. I think they just found out everything there possibly is. But if people want to come to the center and learn about our work here, which is meditation, education, and direct service in the community, they should check out the website. We also have a Buddhist approach to the 12-step meeting on Friday nights at 7 o'clock. There was a fellow traveler in San Francisco Zen Center who collected a series of essays called the 9 Essays on Buddhism and the 12-Step Model of Recovery. So our group meets. Not everyone is Buddhist, but they are, say, Boo curious, and they have some kind of meditation practice. So we gather. We use really pretty much the same format as a regular 12-step meeting, with a speaker and round robin usually, and it's a great meeting. We work from January on step 1 and then go through the year. It'd be great to see any newcomers to the meeting or to the center.
Yeah, I'd love to stop by there, and hopefully one day we can share our own story of how we met. Until then, I must remain anonymous because I don't have a new job yet. Okay. All right, brother, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
It was great talking to you, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Okay, thanks, Chotto. All right, that's it for the Spiritual Bazaar. If you want to get in touch with me, you can go to the website spiritualbazaar.com and send me an email, or you could direct message me on Instagram or through Twitter. Instagram is Spiritual Bazaar, at Spiritual Bazaar, and Instagram is Spiritual Bazaar, but with no E. All right, that's it. Peace and love, everybody, and be well.